For Telesur, I'm Regan Devines in Caracas. We start with tonight's headlines. Preliminary results have come in Guatemala's elections, with former comedian Jimmy Morales leading the race in the runoff. A report from an independent committee investigating the disappearance of 43 students in Ayotzinapa, Mexico, exposes the incompetence of government officials. And polls have just closed in Trinidad and Tobago in what is expected to be a tight race for the post of Prime Minister. Thank you for joining us. Millions of Guatemalans have voted in historic but controversial elections held days after former head of state Otto Perez Molina resigned over a huge corruption scandal. With 98% of the returns counted, the outsider and former comedian Jimmy Morales has a clear lead with almost 24% of the votes. But it is still unclear who he will face in the second round of October 25th. Sandra Torres of the left-leaning UNE party has only 4,000 votes more than the candidate of the traditional right-wing leader party, Manuel Baldizon. The favorite to win the second round, Jimmy Morales, is reportedly linked to a war criminal from the country's period of genocide in the 1980s. Edgar Justino Ovalle, responsible for organizing Morales' campaign, was identified as the senior commander of a special military unit in Guatemala's Quiché region from 1981 to 1982, a period which saw 77 massacres in the region.
I feel happy and committed. We were hoping this would happen. The probability was low, but we never lost faith. We fought with strength, and here we are. The counting of votes is not yet done, but we are confident the trend will continue going our way.
The most likely candidate to face Morales in the second round, Sandra Torres, is the ex-wife of former President Alvaro Colom. Seen as the most left-leaning candidate in the race, she says she wants to maintain cordial relations with the United States.
We have a good relationship with the United States. As I was saying, we need to take advantage of the financial support and do it properly. We have a good relationship, and I think we can strengthen it.
And the election authorities say this election has seen the highest turnout ever at just over 70%. Over 5 million of the 7.5 million eligible voters cast a ballot. Many social movements that have protested for weeks against corruption for the resignation of President Otto Perez Molina had called for the poll to be suspended. They argued that the country needs much deeper reforms.
As a Guatemalan, I am honored to congratulate the Guatemalan people on their high level of patriotism, reaching a turnout of 17.38%, a record in the history of Guatemalan democracy. This unprecedented result strengthens out democracy and shows the high political culture of our people.
In Mexico, an independent commission has completely debunked the government's claim that the 43 forcibly disappeared Ayotzinapa students were burned in a dumping site. The report says that it was highly possible that the disappeared students may have unknowingly been using a bus regularly used to smuggle drugs out of Guerrero towards the United States. Also, that the local police forces, army and intelligence officers were involved in the attacks that led to the disappearances. The official version of their bodies being burnt was ruled out, saying it was impossible in the circumstances.
The flame of 7 meters would have had to tilt toward the dump, igniting all the plastic that still existed. It is a rather dry dump, and therefore there should have been a forest fire, a fire that would have burned this whole area. For all these reasons, the GEI, interdisciplinary group of experts, have formed the belief that these boys were not incinerated in the dump of Cocula.
And for more on this story of this damning report, we turn to Clayton Khan in Mexico.
The anticipated final report of the independent group of investigators who were tasked to investigate the case of the 43 disappeared Ayotzinapa students was presented yesterday to the families of the youth, the press, and Mexican officials of the country's Attorney General's office. Now, the major conclusion is that the official investigation has been wrought with inconsistencies, and the authorities' so-called historic truth that the youth were executed and burned in a garbage dump in the town of Cocula, Guerrero, is false. Now, the investigators also determined a long-carried suspicion of the families of the 43 students that the state and federal police, along with the military, were aware and present during the September 2014 attack by the local police of Iguala, Guerrero. Now, the damning 500-page report was received by the families of the students with a degree of optimism, knowing that their children could not have been cremated in that garbage dump. Yet the families say they still suffer for not knowing the whereabouts of their children. Finally, Mexico's Attorney General Aurelio Gomez announced yesterday, after the announcement, that a new analysis with new experts into the incineration of the youth will be carried out. This is Clinton Khan reporting for Telesur here in Mexico City.
And hundreds of Mexico's women marched to the government's headquarters in the northern Mexican state of Chihuahua with the cry that the culture of violence must come to an end. The women were all from the leftist National Regeneration Movement and called on the state to do more against femicides and the disappearance of women. So far this year, at least 10 women have been killed in the state, and critics say that government inaction contributes to the rising number of deaths. Counting of votes has begun in Trinidad and Tobago as residents voted for who they want to be their representatives for the next 5 years. The polls have just closed and results are expected in the coming hours. Over 1 million registered voters will choose 41 members of the parliament. The two main groups contesting the elections are the ruling coalition party, the People's Partnership, led by Prime Minister Kamil Prasad-Bisesa, and the People's National Movement, the country's oldest political organization, currently led by opposition leader Dr. Keith Rowley, which has had several terms in government. Officials at the Colombia-Venezuela border have allowed licensed workers, students, and drivers of cargo vehicles to pass between the countries following Venezuela's closing of the border to stop paramilitary activity and smuggling. Thousands of Venezuelan children who live close to the border and attend school in Colombia were allowed to travel. The mayor of Cucuta, Dona Maris Ramirez, also confirmed that Venezuelan authorities had allowed Colombian workers to cross into Venezuela if they showed a valid license. The FBI spied on famed Colombian writer and Nobel laureate Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This is according to a report in the Washington Post. The U.S. paper obtained recently declassified documents exposing how the FBI began to monitor Garcia Marquez between 1961 and 1985. It is unclear from the 137 released pages of the document why they pursued the author, but it might be connected to his founding of Prensa Latina, the press agency for Cuba. The Ecuadorian faithful near the Cotopaxi volcano are carrying a replica of the Virgin of El Quinche from neighborhood to pray for protection. For 3 weeks, volcanic ash has been continuously falling over communities west of the Cotopaxi volcano, located about 70 kilometers south of the capital city of Quito. Many nearby residents have already evacuated. And a bus accident in Rio de Janeiro state left 15 people dead and 66 injured after the driver lost control of a vehicle on a downhill stretch. The accident happened half an hour after the bus, run by a company, Colutur, left the coastal town of Paraty, carrying mainly tourists. According to civil police, a fault in the brakes resulted in the driver losing control of the vehicle, which hurtled some 50 meters before crashing on the side of the road. Coming up after the break, crowds push, shove and run as refugees try to board trains bound for Northern Europe as the zone is forced into action to abate the crisis. That's next.
Discover Latin America and the world in our programs. Telesur Reports, The Real USA, the stories behind the tweets, Ataman, Lives, Know Your Body, Open Files. Exposing the conflicts that affect our people, compelling personal stories, and the most controversial events. See it all on telesurtv.net in English. Telesur. Wherever the news, you'll be there. An insight into Africa today with Bill Fletcher. The Global African, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there. The truth behind the power. We lift the lid on some of the world's most ruthless figures. Open file, only on telesurtv.net in English. Wherever the news, you'll be there.
A warehouse turned shelter opened its doors in Ham, Germany to refugees. This after some 20,000 entered Germany from Hungary by train, bus and by foot. Germany's Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier said that the reality that Germany is an immigration society has too long been ignored. He said that while the German public have generally been welcoming of refugees, the German government could have done a lot more. And British Prime Minister David Cameron buckled under local and international pressure to help refugee communities fleeing war. Cameron said in the parliament that his administration has decided to take in up to 20,000 Syrian refugees over the next 5 years. This after the image of a Syrian toddler dead on a beach went viral. The Prime Minister said that Britain had been moved by the imagery and decided that it should fulfill its moral responsibility to help refugees just as they've done in the past.
To spend 0.7% of our GDP on.
Meanwhile, the Prime Ministers of Czech Republic and Slovakia will not conform to the refugee quota system. This after the EU leaders decided on the distribution of 160,000 refugees from Italy, Greece and Hungary. According to the plan, just over 4,000 refugees would have been sent to Czech Republic and about half that figure to Slovakia. The leaders said they still do not believe the quota system is the solution to the refugee crisis.
What
migrant crisis are we talking about when some countries and some of the EU member parties are supporting the war in Syria? What are we talking about when the French people and also the French President Hollande says that terrorists are grouping in Syria? When terrorists are grouping in Syria, how can we distinguish these people from other migrants who are crossing the borders into the European Union without any controls? Let's differentiate things. When it is voluntary and natural, then the government can support it. But I refuse it when someone tells us to receive a number of people we don't know anything about.
Hungary's former Prime Minister Frank Gyurcsány and his family are part of an NGO that gives refugees a roof under which to sleep for a night. How it works is that an allocated number of refugees, sometimes a family, would spend the night. Gyurcsány's family would give them food and a change of clothes. Then they transport the refugees the next day to the railway station or the Office of Immigration and Nationality to receive their papers. The former Prime Minister said he does it simply because it is his duty to.
Enough is enough. Two pictures. The picture of the young child thrown to the beaches, and also the pictures from Hungary, how these people are being treated in the end, and sort of like cattle, you know, and what is their crime?
Palestinians called it a day of rage as thousands marched for justice in the suspected Jewish arson attack on a home in the northern West Bank on July 31st. The 18-month-old son of a couple died in the attack. The father died of related injuries later on August 9th. And now the mother, Riham Dawabsheh, has succumbed to injuries sustained during the July 31st attack. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has declared a 3-day national mourning in honor of the family's death. The first groups of Gazan pilgrims have started to leave for Mecca. More on the story with Noor Harazin.
The first batch of Gaza pilgrims left the coastal enclave Monday morning to Egypt via Rafah border crossing. There, they will be transferred to Mecca in Saudi Arabia for the pilgrimage known as Hajj via Cairo airport the same evening. About 800 pilgrims gathered at Al Katiba Square west of Gaza at 6 o'clock in the morning and were transferred to Rafah border crossing in special proposed buses.
I registered for Hajj 7 years ago. Thank God I was lucky to get the chance for Hajj this year. I thank the Ministry of Waqf, the King of Saudi Arabia, and Egypt for helping us.
The Egyptian authorities announced earlier that Rafah terminal will exceptionally be opened for 3 days on the 7th, 8th and the 9th of September to facilitate the transfer of Gaza pilgrims to Mecca and Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, the Minister of Religious Affairs of the Palestinian Authority, Youssef Hadais, said that about 6,000 pilgrims from the Palestinian territories are planned to perform Hajj this year, pointing out that there were a lot of facilities offered by Egypt and Saudi Arabia to ensure their trip.
This feeling cannot be described. God has destined us to perform Hajj this year. It is a divine grant. Thank God that after 7 years of suffering, registering, paying the fees, getting them back and waiting for the next year, we were honored with this generous trip.
The Hajj begins on the 8th of the month of Dhul Hijjah on the Islamic calendar, and it is one of the greatest occasions in Islam. It is also considered the largest world, where some 2 million Muslims from every spot of the world who can afford to do so arrive in Mecca to perform Hajj at least once in their lifetime. Nur Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
And now for a look at other stories making news around the world.
Rebecca Brooks has returned to run Rupert Murdoch's British newspapers and attempting to rebuild her reputation following the phone hacking scandal. In 2011, the News of the World tabloid she edited admitted that its journalists had hacked into voicemails, including those of a murdered schoolgirl, sparking widespread public revulsion. Chad's former dictator, Hissène Habré, was forced into the dock after refusing to attend the resumption of his trial in Senegal for war crimes and other atrocities. He was once backed by France and the United States as a bulwark against Libya's then leader, Muammar Gaddafi. Saudi-led fighter jets pounded the Yemeni capital of Sana'a, reducing homes and buildings to rubble across the capital and leaving at least 9 people dead. The airstrikes came as Qatar announced that it sent over 1,000 ground troops to Yemen, their first reported involvement in preparations for an offensive backed by the Saudi-led coalition against the dominant Houthi group. And tens of thousands of Moldavians rallied in the capital Chisinau to demand the resignation of President Nicolae Timofti and the election of a new head of state. The demonstrations were sparked by public anger over a $1 billion banking scandal, which has shaken the former Soviet country, one of the poorest countries in Europe.
And now we go live to Jeff Abbott, who is an independent journalist based in Guatemala. We've been following this story for a while. Jeff, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear.
Thank you so much for being here with us. Firstly, what does Jimmy Morales' win mean, and what can we expect in the second round of runoff?
Well, really, the Jimmy Morales' win yesterday represents that the Guatemalan population is really frustrated with the politics as usual. And in a way, they were looking for a candidate that was familiar. And Jimmy Morales, who was presenting himself as an anti-establishment candidate, someone who was outside the political system, was able to run with it and was able to garner the votes that he needed to win.
Jeff, can you describe the word on the streets as it pertains to Jimmy? For example, there's a quote that he made on Sunday. It says, "I might not be the most capable person, but what Guatemala needs today is to get back to believing in itself. We are going to fight corruption emphatically." Can you describe the support that he's garnered as he's running for president?
Can you actually say that one more time? I wasn't able to understand.
You need me to repeat the quote?
Scrambled.
Did you hear the quote that I quoted?
One more time, sorry.
All right, Jeff. The quote from Mr. Morales was, "I might not be the most capable person, but what Guatemala needs today is to get back to believing in itself. We are going to fight corruption emphatically." How do you describe the support that Mr. Morales has gotten as he runs for president?
Well, the thing about Jimmy Morales is that he, in many ways, he's a frontman for another force in Guatemalan society. He comes from a nationalist background, but he also has deep ties with the military, and that comes out within within his campaign and within his rhetoric. His rhetoric is very much tied around the Guatemalan state, the Guatemalan people. And in many ways, this is really influencing how he interacts. And like I said, you know, Guatemalans are looking for something different. They voted for Jimmy Morales, but in many ways, people don't trust him. They see that there's something else behind his words, and many people voted yesterday in order to have the right to be able to protest in the future. And you know, in many ways, the Guatemalan population, they may have voted for him, but they really don't believe in him. He's the better candidate of all the horrible candidates.
So they're more voting just against the traditional politics. Well, after the fall from grace of former President Otto Perez Molina, so to speak, last week in corruption scandals, does this election change Guatemala, do you think, Jeff? Or is it more of just the same?
It's going to be more of the same. That's the sad reality of what's happening here. Really, like I said, there's other forces behind Morales that have brought him to this place of power. And that is really what's going to be driving, things. It's not going to be as blatant necessarily as it was under Otto Perez Molina, but it will be more of the same. And many protesters are recognizing this. They knew that the election was going to bring into power somebody who wasn't necessarily the best candidate, and they knew that, you know, that they weren't going to get the reforms they needed before the elections. So really, this is just the beginning of a bigger movement, of a deeper crisis, really. The Guatemalan people recognize it. A lot of observers are beginning to recognize it. So time will tell what's going to come of that.
Thank you so much, Jeff. It's been great getting your perspective. We hope to catch up with you a bit later on. That was Jeff Morales, an independent journalist in Guatemala. To Bolivia now, where people from across the globe who have been observing the developing sea dispute between Bolivia and Chile all met at the world's highest lake, Bolivia's Lake Titicaca. They all jumped into the below freezing water to draw attention to the ongoing dispute. Meanwhile, a theatrical production in Bolivia highlighted the sea dispute in another way, as actors in the production tried to examine some of the more philosophical questions involved in Bolivia's relationship with the sea. A new film by French photographer Yann Arthus Bertrand will premiere this weekend at the Venice Film Festival, and it promises to be very human. The film features the responses of an interesting selection of people, from a convicted death row inmate to a poor farmer, a lesbian living with HIV, and a refugee. They were all asked questions such as, do you feel free, and what is the meaning of life? And how can we stop hatred and vengeance? The 3-hour-long film featured people in 60 countries and took over 3 years to make. It cost over $12 million.
I have the impression that we are touching on something more essential. What does it mean to be a human being? What does it mean to reflect on your death every day? What does it mean to be able to say I love you to your children or your parents every day? Why do we continue to fight each other like worse than animals? How do we leave hatred behind, vengeance? What do we want to change in our lives? All these questions perhaps crucial that we don't ask ourselves often enough.
More on these and other stories on our website, telesurtv.net/English. From our news teams in Quito, Ecuador, and here in Caracas, Venezuela, my name is Regan Devines for Telesur English. Have a great night.